The station drifted out there on the edge of neutral space, like some cold chunk of metal just hanging in the void. It didn't fly any flag, it didn't belong to anyone, and that was exactly why both sides agreed to meet there. The Kynthian Collective had used this place plenty of times before, dealing with all kinds of species. And those meetings? They always played out the same way. Some smaller, weaker civilization would end up signing the deal. The Collective walked away with exactly what it wanted. They called it diplomacy. Ambassador Rin Talvek showed up 3 hours early. That was his habit. He liked being settled in before anyone else arrived. He preferred to already be seated, already calm, already owning the room before a single word got said. He'd been doing this for 30 years, and he was damn good at it. He sat down at the long, curved table and went over his notes one last time. The species in question was called human. Came from one planet, tucked away in a quiet part of the galaxy. By any standard that mattered, they were young. Sure, they had faster-than-light travel, but barely. They had weapons, but nothing that would even scratch a Kynthian warship. Big population, but spread out thin. No allies out here, no treaties, no backup. The briefing file used the word primitive 3 times. Rin Talvek figured that was being generous. He set the file aside right as the door slid open. 3 humans stepped in. The one leading them was a guy of average height, steady stride, dark eyes scanning the room the second he walked in, taking everything in without making a show of it. His uniform was simple and dark, with a small flag patch on the shoulder. According to the file, his name was Commander Ethan Vale. Behind him came Lieutenant Lena Mercer carrying a data tablet, moving with the kind of quiet focus of someone who'd already read every file in the room twice. The third was Sergeant Marcus Vale. He was bigger than the other 2, standing still in a way that didn't look relaxed at all. It looked like he was ready for something. Rin Talvek motioned toward the seats across from him. "Please sit," he said, his translation caller smoothly converting the words into their language. Ethan pulled out a chair. Before sitting, he turned it just a little, angling himself so he could see both the table and the door. It didn't come off as a power move, just looked like a man who always knew where the exits were. He placed his hands together on the table and waited. Rin Talvek had expected some nervous movement. Most species got twitchy at that table. They'd shuffle papers, pour water they never drank, keep glancing at their advisors. It was always a giveaway. Anxiety. And anxiety was useful. It meant they already understood the power gap. Ethan Vale didn't do any of that. He just sat there, calm, waiting. Rin Talvek cleared his throat. "The Kynthian Collective has reviewed your request for formal recognition within our governance structure. Your civilization is still in an early stage of development. Integration would offer your people significant advantages. Trade access, advanced medical technology, infrastructure support, and most importantly, protection under collective law." Ethan gave a small nod. "And what do you want from us?" "Compliance with collective law and governance, a standard taxation system, and military contribution when requested by the Council." "Military contribution," Ethan repeated. "Service, yes, it is standard for all integrated species." "You mean conscription?" Rin Talvek paused just for a second. "We mean contribution to collective security." Ethan glanced at Lena. She didn't even look up from her tablet. Then he turned back to the ambassador. "Let me make sure I've got this right. You're asking us to give up our right to govern ourselves, pay taxes to a council we don't even have a seat on, and send our soldiers wherever that council decides?" "In exchange for the benefits I mentioned, yes." "And if we say no?" Rin Talvek folded his hands. "Then the offer changes." "Changes how?" "It becomes less of an offer." The room went quiet. One of the Kynthian advisors along the wall shifted a bit. Marcus Vale, standing on the human side, didn't move at all. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. Not like he was backing off, more like he was settling in. "Ambassador, I appreciate your time, and I'll be straight with you. We came here in good faith because we believe in talking first." We're open to agreements, trade, shared security, building something real between our people. But we're not signing anything that takes away our right to make our own decisions, or sends our people into a war they didn't choose. Rin Talvek studied him. The tone wasn't angry. Wasn't desperate either, just clear. He'd heard speeches like this before from other species. Usually it was the last bit of pride before reality hit them. You are brave, Rin Talvek said. Or maybe you just don't understand what the alternative looks like. We understand, Ethan replied. We just think there's a better option than the one you're offering. Rin Talvek slid a data chip across the table. The full terms are on that. You have 48 cycles to review them. After that, the council will expect your answer. Ethan picked up the chip, looked at it for a second, then set it down next to his folded hands. We'll go through it carefully. See that you do. Rin Talvek let a thin smile spread across his face. The kind of smile from someone who'd done this too many times and already thought he knew how it would end. I've given you 48 cycles. That's more than generous. I suggest you make good use of them. Ethan stood up. He fastened the top button of his jacket, the one he'd left open before, and gave a small nod. Thanks for meeting with us. Then he turned and headed for the door. Lena stepped in right beside him. Marcus Vale followed last. Before leaving, he gave one quick glance back. Not at Rin Talvek, but at the room itself, like a soldier sizing up the space. Then the door slid shut behind them, and they were gone. Rin Talvek sat there in the silence for a moment before turning to his chief advisor. Thoughts? The advisor tilted his head slightly. Standard resistance posture. They'll review the terms, realize there's no real alternative, and come back within the 48 cycles asking for a few minor changes. Just enough so their leadership can claim a small win. We give them 1 or 2 insignificant concessions. They sign. That's the end of it. Rin Talvek nodded. That's how it always played out. He picked up his notes and started recording his log for the meeting. He described the human delegation as cooperative in tone but unrealistic in their expectations. He added that a basic fleet demonstration near their outer colonies would likely push them toward compliance if they didn't agree within the 48 cycles. He marked the mission as pending and set the file aside. What he didn't notice while writing all that was that no one on his side of the table had managed to make Commander Ethan Vale blink even once. At the time, it didn't seem important. Later, much later, after everything had changed, he'd think back on that calm and wonder how he'd seen it and dismissed it so easily. The day aliens realized humans were real and completely unstoppable. The 48 cycles passed slowly on the station. The Kynthian staff stuck to their routines. Advisors filed reports. Rin Talvek ate alone in his private quarters, went over his briefings, and waited for the message confirming the humans had made their choice. The message came on the final cycle, short and simple. Commander Ethan Vale requested another meeting. He didn't say whether they were accepting or still negotiating. Rin Talvek assumed acceptance. By this point, they always accepted. Reality had a way of settling in during those 48 cycles. Species would look at their fleet numbers, then compare them to the collectives. They'd run the numbers and arrive at the only conclusion the math allowed. Rin Talvek confirmed the meeting and went to sleep with the quiet confidence of a man who already knew how things would go in the morning. Ethan Vale showed up right on time again. Same 3 people, same calm entrance. Lena Mercer with her tablet. Marcus Vale near the door. Ethan took his seat at the table, hands folded, carrying that same steady calm that Rin Talvek was starting to find unusual. We've reviewed your terms, Ethan said. And you accept, Rin Talvek replied. It wasn't really a question. No, Ethan said. The room went completely still. 2 Kynthian advisors along the wall exchanged a quick glance. Rin Talvek kept his face neutral, voice steady. Then what exactly are you proposing, Commander? Ethan leaned forward and placed a data chip on the table. No dramatic movement, he just set it down. counterproposal. Open trade on equal terms. No conscription under any circumstances. A shared security system where both sides have equal say and veto power. We share intelligence on threats affecting both our people. We sit at the table as partners. Rin Talvek looked at the chip but didn't touch it. You are not in a position to negotiate as equals. With respect, Ethan said, we disagree. Commander, Rin Talvek continued calm but firm, your entire fleet numbers under 300 ships. The nearest Kynthian fleet group alone has over 2,000 vessels. Your weapons rely on projectiles. Your ships are slower than our courier class. No allies in this region, no treaties. Nothing to give you leverage to make demands of the collective. Ethan stayed quiet for a moment, but it wasn't the kind of silence that came from pressure. It was the kind a man used when he wanted his next words to land just right. Ambassador, but can I ask you something? Rin Talvek opened one hand slightly. Go ahead. Do you know Earth's surface gravity? The question caught him off guard. Rin Talvek blinked before he could stop himself. It's in your planetary file, approximately 9.8 meters per second squared. That's right, Ethan said. And Kenthia Prime? 6.1. So your people have lived their entire lives under 6.1. Every soldier, every worker, every citizen. Ethan paused. Our people have lived under 9.8. Every human who's ever walked, run, lifted, worked, or fought has done it under gravity that's nearly 60% stronger than what your soldiers deal with every day. Rin Talvek didn't respond, but now he was listening, really listening. Lena Mercer turned her tablet around and slid it across the table. The screen displayed a dense report. Numbers, charts, comparisons. Rin Talvek leaned forward slightly. The document compared human biology with 6 other species already serving in the collective military. Bone density, muscle fiber structure, injury recovery times, pain tolerance, cardiovascular performance under sustained stress, fatigue timelines measured across hours of continuous high-intensity effort. Human metrics weren't just different. They were different in a way that made the advisor sitting to Rin Talvek's left rise slightly out of his chair to get a closer look. What exactly am I looking at? Rin Talvek asked. You're looking at what happens when a species evolves for hundreds of thousands of years on a high-gravity world, Ethan said, surrounded by things trying to kill them. You're looking at bone structures dense enough that human soldiers can absorb impacts that would shatter the limbs of 3 of the 6 species on that list. What you're seeing is a cardiovascular system that can keep pushing at high output for hours longer than anything the collective has recorded in species of similar size. You're also seeing pain tolerance levels so extreme that even our own doctors still argue about them, because the upper limits of what a human can endure and still function go beyond what their models ever considered survivable. The room went completely silent. The Kynthian advisor, who had stood up slowly, lowered himself back into his seat, still focused on the data. This isn't a threat, Ethan said. I want to be clear about that. We're not here trying to intimidate you. We're sharing this because we believe that if you truly understood what you're looking at when you look at us, this conversation would be very different. He leaned forward just a little. We're not the small, fragile species described in your briefing file, Ambassador. We're something your report didn't have enough information to define correctly. Rin Talvek studied the data for a long moment, then looked back at Ethan. Even if everything here is accurate, it doesn't change the gap in our fleet sizes. You're right, Ethan said. It doesn't. But it does change the cost of what a conflict between us would actually look like. And we believe that if you're the kind of leader we think you are, you'd want to understand that cost before making any decisions. Silence stretched across the room. Rin Talvek picked up the data chip Ethan had placed in front of him. He held it for a moment without activating it. I will review your counterproposal, he said finally. That is all I'm committing to for now." "That's all we're asking," Ethan replied. They left the same way as before, quiet, controlled, without looking back. Rin Talvek watched the door close, then turned to his advisor. The advisor hadn't moved. His eyes were still locked on the tablet. "What do you think?" Rin Talvek asked. The advisor finally looked up. "I think we didn't read their file carefully enough." Rin Talvek took the tablet and looked over it again. This time, he didn't rush. He stayed with it for a long while. Outside the viewport, stars drifted slowly as the station rotated. Somewhere out there, far beyond, was a quiet planet orbiting an unremarkable star. And on that planet, something extraordinary had been developing for a very long time, completely unnoticed. He set the tablet down and reached for the counterproposal chip. He told himself he'd just skim it. He read it 3 times. The day aliens realized humans were real and completely unstoppable. No one planned what happened on Cycle 6. There was no order behind it, no strategy. It wasn't some calculated escalation from either side. It started with a young officer making a bad call during a patrol, and it ended with a piece of footage that changed everything. A Kynthian patrol vessel was running a routine route near the outer edge of the neutral zone when it picked up a signal from a human survey ship. The survey vessel was small, built for mapping and data collection. No weapons on board. Crew of 3, a pilot, a systems officer, and 1 security observer assigned as part of the diplomatic mission. That observer was Sergeant Marcus Vale. The patrol captain was named Grethvor. Young, ambitious, and not completely certain where the neutral boundary actually ran from that angle of approach. He looked at his sensors, decided the human ship had crossed into restricted space, and made a call that would have been correct if his read had been accurate. It wasn't. The human ship was still inside neutral territory by several hundred kilometers. But Grethvor didn't double-check. He ordered a boarding. 8 soldiers moved through the airlock in full armor. They weren't expecting resistance. They were expecting 3 civilians who would raise their hands the moment armed soldiers stepped in. That's how it usually went with smaller species. Show the armor, show the weapons, wait for surrender. Instead, they stepped into the main corridor and found Marcus Vale standing there. No armor, no gun. Just a collapsible baton extended at his side. His stance was solid, feet set slightly wider than shoulder width, weight leaning forward just enough. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at them, like a man already working through the problem in his head. The lead soldier ordered him to stand down in Kynthian. The corridor's translation system carried the command into his language. Marcus glanced at the caller and then back at the soldiers. "This ship is in neutral space," he said. His voice was steady, no shaking, no raised tone. "You don't have the authority to be here. Turn around, go back the way you came, and we'll call it a navigation error." The lead soldier raised his weapon and stepped forward. What followed lasted exactly 4 minutes and 32 seconds. The ship's internal cameras captured every second. Marcus Vale moved first. He didn't wait for them to close the distance. He closed it himself. That alone caught the soldier off guard. The baton struck the inside of the weapon arm before the trigger could be pulled. The weapon jerked sideways. Marcus was already past him, slipping behind, using the first soldier as a shield against the others, moving like water around a rock. Smooth. Fast. No hesitation. He fought the way he'd been trained. Efficient. Direct. No second guessing whether things were as bad as they looked. He already knew they were. That decision had been made the moment the airlock opened. In 4 minutes and 32 seconds, 6 of the 8 soldiers were down. The remaining 2 soldiers pulled back through the airlock and sealed it behind them. The 6 lying on the floor were still breathing. None of them were in danger of dying. Marcus Vale had made sure of that. He hit them just hard enough to end the fight, and not a bit more. When it was over, he stayed standing in the corridor. His breathing was heavy. 3 cuts ran along his left forearm where armor plating had caught him. One side of his face was bruised from a solid hit, but he didn't move like the pain mattered. He looked at the sealed airlock for a second, then turned and walked over to the comm panel. "Vale to Harris," he said. Ethan's voice came back almost instantly. "Go ahead." "We had a boarding attempt. 8 soldiers, no warning." "The ship's secure. 6 are down in the corridor. 2 retreated back through the airlock." There was a brief pause. "You hurt?" "Got some cuts on my arm." "Nothing serious." "Our crew?" "Locked in the rear compartment. Safe. No contact." "Stay where you are. I'm contacting the station now." The footage reached Rin Talvek within the hour. He watched it alone in his private quarters, door shut, no advisors around. He played it all the way through once without stopping. Then he went back and watched it again, this time pausing at key moments, studying every movement more closely. After that, he called in his chief military advisor. The advisor watched the recording twice without saying a word. When it ended the second time, he just stood there, staring at the final frame. Marcus Vale alone in the corridor, 6 armored soldiers down around him. "He's not exceptional," Rin Talvek said quietly, almost to himself. He was thinking back to something Commander Harris had said earlier. "You're not looking at what you think you're looking at." The advisor spoke carefully. The way he moved, transitioning between targets, he wasn't reacting one by one. He was controlling the entire group, positioning himself so they couldn't surround him. That's advanced technique. Our best close combat instructors teach something similar. "But the way he took those hits," he continued. 3 clean strikes landed. "Any one of those would have ended the fight if they'd hit one of our soldiers in that same armor." The advisor turned toward Rin Talvek, and he kept going like nothing happened. "Pain tolerance," Rin Talvek said. "That's the only explanation." He stood up and walked over to the viewport. The station turned slowly, stars drifting across the glass in a long arc. He thought about the data Lena Mercer had shown him. He thought about the numbers in that counter-proposal, how he'd read them 3 separate times. He thought about the way Ethan Vale sat at that table. Completely still. Just waiting. Rin Talvek picked up his communicator and opened a direct line to the human delegation. Ethan answered. "Your sergeant," Rin Talvek said. "Is he all right?" Ethan didn't ask what happened. Didn't ask for details. First thing out of his mouth was concern for his man. "He's fine," Rin Talvek added. "My soldiers are being treated." "Commander, I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "What I saw in that footage, is that typical for your personnel?" There was a short pause. Not long, just enough time for Ethan to decide how honest to be. "Marcus Vale is good at what he does," Ethan said, "but he's not considered exceptional by our standards." Rin Talvek closed his eyes for a brief moment. "I see." "Ambassador," Ethan continued, "I'd like to come in. I think it's time we finished our conversation." Rin Talvek looked at the frozen image still on his screen. 6 of his soldiers down, 1 human standing. "Yes," he said. "Come in tomorrow morning. I'll have the council chamber ready." He ended the call and stood there in the quiet. He'd been doing this job for 30 years. He'd sat across from desperate species, frightened ones, civilizations that broke down in tears when they signed the agreement. He had always known exactly what he was dealing with. Now? He wasn't so sure anymore. That feeling was new. He didn't like it, but he respected it. And for the first time since the humans walked through that door, Rin Talvek started to wonder if this outcome wasn't as certain as he'd thought. The day aliens realized humans were real, and completely unstoppable. The council chamber looked exactly the same as always. Same table, same chairs, same faint smell of metal oil and recycled air, same viewport showing slow-moving stars. But the atmosphere in the room had changed. Rin Talvek noticed it the moment he sat down. His advisors were sitting a little straighter, their focus sharper. The confidence was still there, but now there was a crack in it, like a heavy plate with a hairline fracture. Still holding, but not quite solid anymore. 2 senior council members had joined the meeting this time. That alone meant something. They hadn't bothered showing up before. Now they were here. The humans entered, and the feeling in the room shifted again. The kind of shift that happens when people walk in carrying none of the weight you expected them to carry. Ethan Vale wasn't alone this time. He brought a 4th person, Captain Nora Ellison. She was compact, quiet, with steady eyes, and the kind of stillness you only get from spending years in high-pressure situations where losing control isn't an option. She sat beside Lena Mercer and stayed silent at first, which worked, because there was a lot to cover before it was her turn. Ethan started with the boarding incident. He laid everything out straight: what happened, where the ship was positioned, and what the patrol captain chose to do. He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to use it as leverage. He just presented the facts in that same calm, steady way, and then stopped talking. Rin Talvek acknowledged the mistake. One of the senior council members followed up with a formal apology. It wasn't long, but it was sincere. Ethan gave a small nod and said the issue was noted, and that the human side was ready to move forward. That's when the real discussion began. Rin Talvek placed the counter-proposal chip on the table. He had gone through it 6 times himself. His advisors had studied it in depth. They found it solid, more advanced than expected, and built on real equality, not the kind of surface-level equality weaker species sometimes argued for but never actually got. "We've reviewed your terms," he said. "Some sections are acceptable. Others will need discussion." "That's why we're here," Ethan replied. They worked through it piece by piece. Trade access went quickly. Both sides wanted that. Military cooperation took longer. The collective's entire system was built on hierarchy. The human proposal was different. Mutual agreement, shared authority, no side committing the other's forces without consent. It was simple and completely new. 2 of Rin Talvek's advisors pointed that out directly. Ethan listened, then answered calmly. "The reason no one else has asked for that," he said, "is probably because no one else was in a position where it made sense for both sides." He didn't sound arrogant, just matter of fact. The room went quiet again. After a moment, Rin Talvek called for a short break. He stepped out with the senior council members. They didn't go far, just into the corridor, speaking in low voices for several minutes. When they came back, the advisors who had objected earlier didn't bring it up again. The discussion moved on. At one point, one of the Kynthian advisors turned to Nora Ellison, who had been quietly taking notes, and asked if he could ask her something off the record. Nora glanced at Ethan. Ethan gave a small nod. The advisor didn't ask about politics or fleets. He asked about Earth, the planet itself, the animals, especially the dangerous ones. Nora set her stylus down and leaned forward. Then she started talking. She spoke about the oceans and what lived in them. Creatures the size of ships, breathing air, communicating across hundreds of kilometers through sound. She described predators with teeth built to crush bone, hunters that worked in coordinated packs, animals that ambushed, others that chased prey for hours across open ground simply because they could outlast anything they pursued. She talked about creatures that looked harmless, but weren't. Species older than humanity itself, and others that only survived because humans chose to protect them. The advisor started writing things down. Both senior council members were listening closely now. Rin Talvek had completely stopped looking at his notes. Nora went on. She talked about the ice ages, how the cold spread across the planet, wiping out anything that couldn't adapt, leaving only the ones that could survive and evolve stronger. She talked about diseases, ones that swept through human populations, killing millions, and how humans fought back with science, persistence, and sheer refusal to lose. She mentioned volcanoes, floods, long droughts where survival itself was uncertain. And yet, People endured. You don't think of your world as dangerous? One of the council members asked quietly when she paused. Nora thought about it. We have national parks, she said. Places we protect so nature stays wild and animals stay free. We take our kids there, we hike. We camp in tents. A faint smile crossed her face. We see our world as home. It's beautiful. Then she added, but it's also a place that spent a very long time testing us before it let us build anything lasting. We passed. The room fell silent again. Rin Talvek looked at Ethan. Tell me honestly, he said. When I told you the offer would become less? If you refused, were you concerned? Ethan thought about it for a moment. We didn't like it, he said. We didn't want a conflict. But no, not in the way you meant. Because you thought you could win? Because we knew what it would cost you, Ethan said. And we knew you didn't know that yet. We came back to talk instead of letting it play out, because we genuinely didn't want either side paying that price. He paused. That's the truth. Rin Talvek was quiet for a few seconds, then he said, I believe you. He picked up the counter-proposal and wrote something at the top of the first page. Then he turned it around and slid it across the table. At the top, in Kynthian formal script, was a single word. Accepted as a basis. Ethan read it. He didn't grin, didn't show relief, he just nodded. And just like that, the tension in the room eased, slowly like pressure releasing from a sealed chamber. For the first time in 3 meetings, this felt like it might actually work. They kept going for another 4 hours. No one rushed. No one tried to leave early. When they finally wrapped up and agreed to continue the next day, Rin Talvek walked with Ethan to the door. Almost without thinking, he said, Your world sounds extraordinary. Ethan looked at him for a moment. It is, he said simply. You should come visit sometime. Rin Talvek watched him walk down the corridor, and for the first time, he thought maybe he actually would, the day aliens realized humans were real and completely unstoppable. The final agreement took another 11 cycles to finish. It wasn't easy. The best things never are. There were long nights at that table where a single line of wording turned into a 2-hour argument. There were stretches of silence so long that the station's ventilation system became the loudest thing in the room. Twice Lena Mercer set her tablet down very deliberately and said nothing. Both times Ethan leaned forward and spoke in a low, steady voice, and whatever he said pulled the conversation back from the edge and into something workable again. No one on the Kynthian side ever asked what he said. They didn't need to. The result spoke for itself. Rin Talvek's senior council members pushed hardest against the joint veto clause. They had never agreed to anything like it. They'd negotiated with over 40 species, and not one of them had ever been given real veto power over collective military action. It went against everything their system was built on. Ethan didn't argue, didn't get frustrated. He just kept explaining the same idea, slightly different each time, like a man who had all the time in the universe. He said it wasn't about limiting the collective. It was about building something neither side could break on its own, something stronger than any agreement held together by fear. We're not building a leash, he said at one point. We're building a foundation. By the 9th cycle, the council members stopped pushing back on that clause. The taxation section was easier. The humans came prepared, with a detailed economic projection covering 10 years of trade. And the numbers were solid, for both sides. Lena Mercer had built the model, and she walked them through it with patience and precision. By the end, even the most skeptical Kynthian economic advisor had shifted, from doubt to curiosity. He started asking detailed questions about Earth's manufacturing systems, like someone realizing they may have seriously underestimated the size of the opportunity. Marcus Vale spent most of those 11 cycles in the station gym or walking the corridors. He wasn't needed at the table. That wasn't his role. But after what happened on the survey ship, people noticed him. Kynthian soldiers from the level above the gym started showing up at the observation window every morning. They watched him train, watched him run drills alone, working with the baton or just his hands and feet against heavy resistance bags bolted to the wall. No one talked. They just watched. After a few days, some of them started arriving earlier, just to catch the beginning of his routine. One morning, a young soldier who was supposed to be on administrative duty was caught at the window for the third day in a row. His supervisor walked up ready to correct him. Then he looked through the glass, watched for a few minutes. 4 minutes exactly. Then he said nothing, and quietly reassigned the soldier's duty to a different time slot. The signing ceremony was small. Both sides agreed on that. No spectacle. No performance. Because what they built here didn't need it. This wasn't theater. It was real. And real things don't need a show. Rin Talvek stood at the table across from Ethan Vale. Lena Mercer and Nora Ellison were there. 2 Kynthian council members stood behind Rin Talvek. Same room as the first meeting, same table. Same faint smell of mineral oil. But the feeling completely different. They signed. Each of them marked the document. A single camera on a tripod recorded it. No speeches. Rin Talvek had considered one, then decided against it. Ethan had apparently done the same. When it was finished, they looked at each other across the table. Rin Talvek extended his hand, copying the human gesture he'd seen Ethan use before. Ethan shook it firmly. "Good work," Ethan said. "A good outcome for both sides," Rin Talvek replied. The room slowly emptied. Nora Ellison walked out alongside the Kynthian economic advisor, still deep in conversation about trade routes, like the signing had just been a short pause in something much bigger. Rin Talvek stayed behind. He walked to the viewport and stood there alone. Out past the glass, beyond the neutral zone, past patrol routes and empty stretches of space, there was a system he once described as unremarkable. A quiet star, an average planet, a young species that didn't yet understand its place. He had been wrong about almost all of it. That planet wasn't average, he knew that now. A world with that kind of gravity, that kind of violent history, that kind of relentless biology, doesn't produce an average species. It produces something else. Something that sits at a negotiation table without fidgeting. Something that sends one unarmed man against 8 soldiers and has him walk away standing. Something that talks about a deadly, beautiful home with quiet pride, completely aware of what it is and not ashamed of any of it. Rin Talvek had almost sent a fleet. He remembered writing it in his log that first night. A single fleet demonstration near their outer colonies would likely force compliance. He stared out at the stars and understood just how close he had come to making the worst decision of his entire career. He was glad the fleet had stayed exactly where it was. Rin Talvek turned away from the viewport and gathered up his documents for the next session. Another meeting was already on the schedule. This one focused on coordinating the first joint trade convoy. The Kynthian economic advisor had specifically asked for Lena Mercer to be there. Rin Talvek had already approved it. Ethan Vale left the station later that same day. No ceremony, no attention, just a short goodbye. He filed his reports, briefed his team, and boarded a transport back to Earth right on schedule. From what Rin Talvek understood about human culture, Ethan would probably write up a clean summary for the diplomatic archives. Then take a few days off before moving on to whatever came next. Rin Talvek hoped he did. He'd earned it. And in a way Rin Talvek hadn't expected even a month earlier. He hoped they'd meet again at that same table. Not because of a crisis, not because something went wrong, just because the conversation had been worth having. Out beyond the station, drifting in the long, quiet dark between stars, the first joint human-Kynthian trade convoy was already being planned. 30 cycles out, it would depart from a human port and enter collective space, carrying goods neither side had ever had access to before. For the first time in history, the crew would include members of both species. It wouldn't be the last convoy, just the first of many. and back on Earth. In a quiet stretch of countryside where the air stayed clean and the night sky still showed the stars clearly, Ethan Vale sat on the back porch of his family's house, looking up for a long time. He didn't say anything, just watched. The stars looked back the same way they always had, full of everything still out there, waiting. After a while, when the cold started to creep in, he went inside. He made himself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table holding the mug in both hands, letting the silence of the house settle around him. There was work waiting in the morning. There was always work waiting in the morning, and for once, he was actually looking forward to it.